Okay, good morning, everyone. Nice to see all of you guys. Welcome back. Nice to see you. Welcome to everyone joining us online as well. Today is the first day of our Foundation in the Path to Enlightenment course. Some of you guys were here yesterday. We did kind of an introduction to the teachings of the Buddha, but today we're going to get started with a more in-depth course where I'm going to be walking you guys through developing a foundation in the path to enlightenment. As we go each day, I'm going to be getting deeper and deeper and deeper into the teachings to be able to help you guys to develop a foundational understanding of the teachings of the Buddha and how to build a life practice to be able to make your way to enlightenment. What enlightenment is where the mind is completely peaceful, calm, serene, and content with joy. By the time you get to enlightenment, you're not experiencing discontent feelings any longer. You're no longer going to be experiencing anger, sadness, frustration, irritation, annoyance, guilt, shame, fear, stress, anxiety, loneliness, boredom, shyness, resentment, jealousy. All these feelings and others are completely eliminated from the mind. You won't even have the slightest displeasure by the time you get to enlightenment. The mind's going to be focused, having concentration, clarity, and deep memory. You'll see your personal and professional relationships are really blossoming because you're not being bitter and harsh and hostile any longer in your relationships. You'll get to the point where you're not even in a bad mood. It's physically impossible for the mind to experience a bad mood by the time you've trained it and made the changes that you need in order to transform your mind. There's many things that I'm going to be teaching you guys over the coming days, but we're going to get started with meditation so that you guys can experience some meditation. And then as we go, I'm going to kind of unfold each aspect of the teachings of the Buddha. Today, what we're going to be learning is we're going to be learning the life story of the Buddha, kind of starting out with that, because that's a great place to start, is just understanding who this individual is and what his life was all about. Then we're going to take a mid-morning break, and we'll probably take a nice long break, give you guys a chance to talk and get to know each other, enjoy the growing buffet that we have over here of snacks and fruits and stuff like that. Then we'll come back, and I'm going to teach you guys what is enlightenment. This is the mental state. We're going to spend a good amount of time to make sure that you understand what that is, because if you're going to make your journey to somewhere, you kind of need to know, like, where are you going, where are you headed, because it's going to make it easier for you to make your journey to that place. And once you arrive, you'll know that you're actually there. We're going to take an hour and a half lunch break, give you guys a chance to go out and find some food, or if you'd like to stay here, you're more than welcome to do that. Vibhav will probably have some suggestions at lunchtime that you guys can take him up on if you'd like. And then we're going to come back in the afternoon, and I'm going to teach you guys Buddhist chanting, the chanting that we do before the meditation and after the meditation. So if you guys would like to join for the meditation, I start with the chanting. We have chanting sheets here. If you guys would like to make your way to those and have those, you're welcome to chant. Even though I haven't taught it to you yet, you can still chant along. And for those of you guys that are online, if you would like to get access to these chanting sheets, you can go to buddhadailywisdom.com, and from there click on free books, and down towards the bottom you're going to see the daily chanting sheet. This is the exact same thing that we're handing out here so that everybody has access to the chanting sheet. Good morning, good morning, good morning. Nice to see you guys. So these chants that you're seeing, they're in the Pali language. This is a historical language of the teachings of the Buddha, and you see the English translations there as well. During the lifetime of the Buddha, they used chanting as a way to remember the teachings. That every 2 weeks they would come together and they would recite the teachings, and that's how they remembered them. Because during his lifetime, they didn't have the ability to write things down because the technology just didn't exist. So every 2 weeks they would come together and they would recite his teachings. So when we're chanting, it's important to understand that it's not a rite or ritual or a ceremony or worship. It's not prayer or anything like that. That you can see the origins of the chanting is that it was used as a tool and a device to remember the actual teaching. So there's nothing mystical or magical here with the chanting. And if you see the English translations, there's an enormous amount of respect and gratitude and appreciation for the Buddha. And because of that, I think his students probably created these either during his life or after his death, because a Buddha wouldn't go around and say, here, chant these things to me out of respect for me. This is like ego and arrogance. So I know the Buddha would have created these. But if you learn from a teacher how to move from anger and sadness and frustration and all these other feelings to this peaceful and joyful mental state that is enlightenment, and this person didn't want anything from you or expect anything from you, you'd probably have a lot of respect and gratitude for that person too. So that's why I think these actually came from his students. So I'm going to do that to ease us into the meditation. Then I'm going to provide you some guidance during the meditation for just a short period of time, kind of instructing you into meditation while we're actually doing it. Then I'm going to have this period of time where it's just quiet and we're just meditating together. Today, we'll kind of do a shorter meditation, but each day we're going to be expanding this more and more and more as we are meditating to give you guys a chance to build up your meditation practice. Then, after that period of time of quiet, then we're going to come out of the meditation with some more chanting. And that's where we'll start today's class. And I'll share with you guys the life story of the Buddha to get us started with that. So, if you'd like to take a position, either seated, lying, or standing, there's also a walking position, which I'm going to teach you guys on Saturday afternoon. There's a walking meditation. So, I'm going to be teaching you guys these 4 positions as part of this course. But in terms of the seated position, people like to sit on the floor, or on a sofa, or a chair. Some people at home, you might be on a wheelchair or a bench or something like this. You can really sit however you're comfortable. Some people that are on the floor, they like to usually have a cushion under their rear. This will kind of make it softer for you to sit. And then if you cross your legs, you usually like those to be just lightly crossed because that way it won't impede the circulation. But there's not just one way to sit. You can sit however you're comfortable. So the guidance that I'm giving you here is just a recommendation for you to find something that's more comfortable for yourself. But you sit however you're comfortable. We're not training the body. We're actually training the mind. So we need the body to be comfortable during the meditation. And then the Buddha put his right hand over his left with his thumbs together, and he put this into his lap. But again, it's not about everyone doing it exactly the same way. There's other options as well. Some people like to put their palms on their thighs or on their knees. Some people put their palms up. Some people rest their hands comfortably in their lap. So you do whatever is comfortable for you. And then the same thing for anyone in a chair, on the sofa. You can sit however you're comfortable. If you're at home on a wheelchair or a bench or anything like that, you might decide to sit with your feet flat on the floor or lightly crossed at the ankles and put your hands and arms wherever you're comfortable. It's helpful if the upper body is erect with the sternum up and the shoulders back. It keeps the mind attentive and alert during the meditation because this is a dedicated, active, purposeful training session where you're eliminating certain unwholesome qualities and you're cultivating certain wholesome qualities in the mind. So you'd like the mind to be attentive and alert during this meditation. Whereas if I was slouched, the mind would have a tendency to be dull or lethargic. But if I was real rigid, the mind would be overactive or uptight. So you'd like the upper body to be in the middle where it's comfortable and it's upright. This will keep the mind attentive and alert. And it'll also make it easy for you to breathe in through the nose and out through the nose. So again, I'm going to get started with the chanting. You guys are welcome to join in. And this afternoon, I'll teach it to you, but you're welcome to join into it right here if you like. And then I'll come back in with some guidance. Arahang Samma Sambuddho Mahakeva Bhutang Mahakavanang Apivateyami Savakato Mahakavata Tammo Dhammang Namasami Supatipano Mahakavato Savaka Sangho Sanghang Namami Namo Rasa Bhagavato Arahato Samma Sambuddhassa Namo Rasa Bhagavato Arahato Samma Sambuddhassa Namo Rasa Bhagavato Arahato Samma Sambuddhassa Iti piso Mahakeva Arahang Samma Sambuddho Vicacaranang Sammuno Sakatoro Kavitu Anutero Purisa Dhamma sati sata tava manusanam Oto Bhagavati. Okay, with the lower body and hands and arms comfortable, and the upper body erect. Just close the eyes and start breathing in through the nose and out through the nose. Here you're just looking to establish the breath, a nice, natural, steady, consistent breath. Not forced or controlled, just a gradual inhale through the nose, experiencing the full breath. And then, whenever you're ready, exhale out through the nose, breathing in and out, breathing in and out. Your breath may not match up with the guidance that I'm providing, and that's okay. This is your practice. I'm just here for guidance. You can use this voice as a reminder that whenever you get to the next inhale, breathe in gradually through the nose, developing a nice, natural, steady, consistent breath. And then, whenever you're ready, exhale out through the nose, breathing in and out, breathing in and out. With the breath well established, start fixating the mind on the breath, either the sound of the breath coming into the nose or the sensation of air moving over the skin into the nose. The breath is the present moment. Fixate the mind on the breath, the present moment. Breathing in and out. Breathing in and out. With the mind fixated on the breath, whenever you notice that it moves off the breath, cut that off, let it go, and come back to the breath, the present moment. No need to observe the thought, label it, judge it, analyze it, or even try to figure out where it's coming from. Whenever you notice that the mind is moved off the breath, cut that off, let it go, and come back to the breath, the present moment. Breathing in and out. Breathing in and out. I'm going to be quiet now and let you do this work of focusing on the breath, cutting off and letting go anytime the mind moves off the breath. You have nowhere to go. There's nothing to do. No one needs you right now. This is your time to focus on the breath. Breathing in and out. Once again, welcome to all of you guys. Nice to see everyone here. This meditation that we did is called Breathing Mindfulness Meditation. I'm going to teach you guys the ins and outs of this tomorrow afternoon, but between now and then, I give you guys a chance just to experience it a bit so that when we get to the point where it's actually time to teach it, that you'll actually uh, know what we're doing because you've actually been doing it a few times. Now, I know that all of us have traveled a certain amount of distance to be able to come here. And I really appreciate that you guys have decided that you were interested enough in the teachings of the Buddha to travel here, no matter how far, how wide, whether it was from your bedroom downstairs to the living room, no matter how far you've traveled. I really appreciate that you guys are dedicated enough to come here and learn. And one of the ways that I honor that dedication is by really teaching you, getting in depth. So as we go this week, we can get as in depth into these teachings as you guys would like. As you guys know, as we go through the course, you guys are welcome to ask any and all questions that you like. I'm going to be pausing at different times to open up to any questions that you have. Those of you guys here, when you have questions, if you wouldn't mind using the microphones, you guys are welcome to keep these with you and use them so that way the people online can hear. And then for those of you guys that are online, if you have questions, you can put that into Facebook, YouTube, or Zoom in the comment section. I'll be able to see that. Or in Zoom, you can electronically raise your hand, unmute your microphone, and then ask any and all questions that you like. So to help you guys understand what it is I'm going to teach you over the coming days, I'm going to first share with you guys the details of what we're actually going to be sharing throughout the course. Yesterday, you guys asked for contact information. This is the contact information, as you guys can feel free to reach me. This is more so for even after the course, because during the course, you guys can ask me anything and everything that you like. But after the course, you're going to need support. Nobody's going to get to enlightenment in these next 4 days, right? So you're going to need help. You're going to need support. So you can use this contact information here. Our website has all of this. If you go to buddhadailywisdom.com, you'll be able to see all of this stuff. But this is all the different ways that you can contact me. So in terms of what we're going to be doing in our schedule is now, we just did kind of a welcome and an introduction, welcoming you guys here. But this is kind of our daily schedule of what we're going to be doing each day. Now we're going to start off at 9:30 in the morning with chanting and meditation, just like we did this morning. Then after our chanting and meditation at 10 o'clock, we're going to go into a talk on the teachings. Some people refer to this as a Dhamma talk because the word Dhamma means teachings, but to say teachings talk, it doesn't quite sound, right? So I think of these as discussions. Like I'm not here lecturing you. I'm not giving you a sermon or anything like that. We're having a discussion where I'm sharing the teachings with you. I'm helping you to understand them. You're asking questions about them. And that's the discussion that we're having. So I think of this as a discussion. Then around 12:30 each day, give or take, we're going to be having lunch where we're going to break for an hour and a half. There's plenty of great food out there. Or if you would like to bring your own food, you're welcome to do that. Viv has some really nice areas outside that you can make yourself comfortable, or inside. We have a little breakout room over here with a growing buffet of food and snacks that you guys are welcome to help yourself to. So we're going to take an hour and a half each day to rest and relax and get some food. At the temple where I teach, sometimes people take a nap. I'm sure Vibhav doesn't mind if you'd like to lay down and take a nap. I'm staying downstairs. There's a bed down there. If you'd like to use that, feel free to make yourself comfortable, whatever you need. But then around 2 o'clock each day, we're going to come back and have more discussion about the teachings of the Buddha. And that's where I'm typically going to be teaching about meditation. And we're going to be doing meditation in the afternoons too. So you're going to get an opportunity to be doing meditation twice a day over the next 4 days. And that'll give you a chance to build up your meditation practice. And you can see the benefit that it has to your mind. And then you'll be able to continue with this after the course so that way you can continue to meditate consistently and see the real improvements that you can make to the condition of your mind in your life. And then we're going to finish generally around 3:30 each day, maybe sometimes a little bit earlier, maybe sometimes a little bit later, but not much. Right around 3:30 is when we're going to be kind of finishing up for each day. The course that I'm going to be teaching you guys, it's based on this first book that I share as part of the book series that I teach. It's called Developing a Life Practice, The Path That Leads to Enlightenment. This course doesn't cover the entire book. I have other programs and things like that do that. But this particular course, we cover chapters 3, 4, 5, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, and 19. So if you have access to this, which you guys all do have access to it now, which is on our website, you download it from there, you'll be able to get access to it. It's free. You can take it and go print it if you like. You can get printed versions on Amazon because Amazon has it as well. And then if you're ever in Chiang Mai, we have printed versions at the temple that you can get at no cost, where you basically are reimbursing us for our printing costs. So I suggest that you take an opportunity to read this, starting at the beginning and working your way through slowly but surely, because there's certain things in the book that aren't in the course, and there's certain things that are in the course that aren't in the book. So a combination of the two are going to really help you to be able to be fully informed about the teachings of the Buddha. So this is really helpful, and it's part of a book series. There's a 13-volume book series, and this book series is titled "The Words of the Buddha: The Path to Enlightenment, Revealing the Hidden," because these teachings have really been hidden for a long time, not intentionally, but just because it's been so expensive for people to print out the large volumes of books. There's 45 volumes of books of the teachings of the Buddha. So what this book series does is it consolidates it, makes it more manageable for you to approach it, and then we give it away for free, because in the past the internet wasn't there. So now we can give it away and distribute it at no cost. But all throughout history, it's been really hard for people to get access to his teachings because they're so comprehensive. So we've consolidated it and then made it available at no cost, removing that barrier. So you guys can get access to that. In terms of what I'm going to be teaching you, these are the topics. We're going to start off this morning with the life story of the Buddha, where I'll help you to understand who this individual is and what he did during his life and give you some background on that. And you guys will be able to ask any and all questions that you like. Then after our mid-morning break, I'm going to teach you what is enlightenment. If you're going somewhere, like if there's like a city up north or down south, and I was like, hey, would you like to go to Los Angeles? You'd be like, well, what is that Los Angeles? What's there? If you've never been, right? You'd be like, what's there? What's to do there, right? So you need to kind of know a little bit about this place so that you can navigate your way to it. And then once you get there, you'll know that you're in Los Angeles, right? But if you didn't know anything about it, you wouldn't even know whether you're interested in going. You wouldn't know how to navigate your way there, and you wouldn't know when you've arrived. So that's why I start off with helping you guys to understand what enlightenment is, so that you can navigate your way to it more easily, that you'll understand how to get there. And once you actually arrive, you'll know that you're actually there. So we'll be talking about that after our mid-morning break. Tomorrow, I'm going to be teaching you the Four Noble Truths, establishing right view in the Eightfold Path. This is the core central teaching of the Buddha. We're going to spend the entire morning doing that with a mid-morning break. This is where the teachings of the Buddha really open up for you, that you'll really be able to see what he taught in order to make your way to this enlightened mental state. So that's a core central teaching. And I'm going to be using the words of the Buddha to walk you through that piece by piece by piece in a way that you can independently verify. Remember, the teachings of the Buddha aren't based in belief. There's nothing about his teachings that are to be believed. Instead, you're learning, examining, and investigating his teachings. You're reflecting on them to independently verify them, and you're practicing them, integrating them into your day-to-day life to experience improvement in this life. So it's not believe, and hope something good happens when you die. It's learn now, reflect now, to verify, and practice now. And therefore, you're going to experience the results now in this life. So that's what I'm going to be doing with you tomorrow, is walking you through in a way that you can independently verify. That you don't even believe me, you don't believe the books, you don't believe any of this stuff, but you investigate it and see for yourself to cultivate wisdom. So I'm going to walk you through that tomorrow. Then we're going to, on the third day, which is Saturday, I'm going to be teaching you transforming the three poisons: craving, anger, and ignorance. This is kind of like a high level way of understanding the unenlightened mind and what you're experiencing, where the Four Noble Truths gives you kind of like a window in four simple statements to be able to break through to understanding what's going on in the mind. The three poisons, or the three unwholesome roots, or the three fires, gives you a broader and a deeper understanding of what's going on in your mind. And we're going to be talking about solutions too, all the way through the course. I'm not just going to be telling you all the issues that are going on in the mind. I'm going to be giving you the solutions of how to fix it. Then I'm going to be teaching you the 5 precepts. This is a householder's guide to daily practice. These are 5 impactful decisions that you could make either wisely or unwisely, and it'll produce either wholesome results for you or unwholesome results for you. If you've heard that the Buddha taught no killing, no stealing, no sexual misconduct, no lying, and no intoxicants, this isn't actually true. The Buddha doesn't teach that way. That sounds like black and white. It sounds like a bunch of rules or commandments. He gives you much more illuminating language to help you really understand his teachings. And what he's helping you to be able to see is this cause and effect, or this action and result, and how we can make decisions wisely and lead to wholesome results, or we can make decisions unwisely and it leads to unwholesome results. So in the 5 precepts, there's these 5 things that he's teaching you of how to make wise decisions around these topics. And we're going to be using the original words of the Buddha there so that you can see exactly what he taught. And then I'm going to show you how to apply it to day-to-day life and modern situations that you're experiencing on a daily basis. Then I'm going to teach you on, uh, let's see, this would be Sunday because my schedule's off because I'm normally Monday through Friday. So on Sunday, I'm going to be teaching you what is karma and how does it affect me. This is the natural law that you're awakening to. When we talk about awakening to enlightenment, what you're doing is cultivating wisdom about the natural laws. And there's multiple natural laws that the Buddha taught, but this is the main natural law that you're learning about and you're trying to understand and you're awakening to this wisdom. So everything and anything that the Buddha taught in one way or another is coming back to the natural law of karma. But on Sunday morning, I'm going to go in and I'm going to talk about this natural law in detail because you would have seen enough of his teachings to now go in and penetrate into that particular natural law and really talk about the ins and outs of it. Because what you're doing on the path, among other things, is you're extinguishing your unwholesome karma, or some people refer to this as karma, right? You're extinguishing this, that by the time you get to enlightenment, you're only experiencing wholesome results, wholesome karma. That's all you're experiencing. But you need to be able to understand what this natural law is and how to extinguish your unwholesome karma to be able to get to that point. And again, this isn't about belief. There's nothing mystical or magical here. It's not punishments or rewards. It's not even about who's to blame or who's at fault. It's about understanding this law so that you can make wise decisions that lead to wholesome results in your life. Then I'm going to teach you what is merit. This is a particular type of wholesome karma. And I'm going to teach you about continued support on the path to enlightenment, how to continue to receive guidance as you go forward. So you have all the resources available to you. Because at that point, our course will be coming to a close and you're going to need to know like how to get help from that point forward. So I'll teach you that. Then, in terms of our meditation practice, I'm going to be teaching you breathing mindfulness meditation, which is something I typically teach in this particular course. But then, for this iteration of this course, I've added in loving kindness meditation because this is something you guys are going to also need to know. But I typically don't teach it in this course. But we had some extra time and I inserted this in because this is going to help you to eliminate your anger, your hatred, your ill will, your frustration, your agitation, your annoyance, even that inner dialogue. If you have like this defeating, degrading inner dialogue where you talk in negative ways towards yourself, this inner dialogue, this will help you to transform that so you can have more positive and uplifting thoughts, not only about others, but yourself as well. I'm going to teach you that. Then I'm going to teach you these 4 different positions of seated, lying, standing, and walking. And I'm going to teach you Buddhist chanting so you can learn what that's all about, the history of it, and how to actually practice it. And then at the very end, I'm going to teach you how to integrate these teachings into your day-to-day life. Because if you come here and you spend whatever amount of time, a day or 2 or 3 or 4, whatever it is, and you had a great time here and you learned a bunch of stuff, excellent. But it's when you integrate the teachings into your day-to-day life that you're going to experience the real results. That's where you would really like to be working towards, is integrating these into your day-to-day life on a daily basis. Okay, so any questions on the things that I'm going to be sharing with you guys over the coming days? No questions? Okay. So now let's go to this first topic of the life story of the Buddha. This is chapter 19 in the book, Developing a Life Practice, The Path That Leads to Enlightenment. This particular chapter is titled The Difficult Human Existence, Sickness, Aging, and Death. And the reason why is because there's these 4 observations that the Buddha made that kind of motivated him to go on this journey to enlightenment. And he looked at the sickness, aging, and death. And then there's one other thing that you're going to hear about in terms of his life story. So I've organized this talk into these particular sections where I'm going to talk about his birth, his early life, his journey to enlightenment, his teaching career, and then we're going to talk about sickness, aging, and death, because these tend to be very challenging times for human beings that you might really struggle about your own sickness, your own aging, your own death, or the people around you. Like if your parents or life partners or people around you are experiencing sickness, aging, or death, that might be a really challenging time for you. So I'm going to explain to you how to look at these in a different way. So typically what I'll do is I'll teach for like 15, 20, 30 minutes and I'll open up to questions, and I'll teach 15, 20, 30 minutes and open up to questions. But with this particular topic, it's better if I just kind of explain to you his whole entire life story and then open up to questions. So I'll open up the questions at the end once I explain all this to you. So this individual that we refer to as Gautama Buddha or the Buddha, he was born as Siddhartha Gautama. That was his name. And he was born into a royal family. His mom was a queen and his dad was the king. And during this time frame, if you were pregnant as a female, they would take you back to your homeland in order to deliver birth or deliver the baby. So she was living with her husband, of course, but then when it was time to deliver, they organized a caravan to take her back to her homeland, because then when she delivers the baby there, she'd have her siblings and her parents and other family members to help her with the child. So she was making her way back to her homeland, she goes into labor pains in the middle of this journey. So they stop the caravan. She gets out. She goes over to this tree and she's holding on to the branch of a tree and she's trying to deliver the baby standing up because the baby wouldn't come out. So she was trying to deliver the baby holding on to the branch of this tree. And because the baby couldn't come out through the normal birthing canal, it ends up breaking through the side of her stomach. And she dies 7 days later. Where today we would have just did a C-section, no big deal, no problem. We have that technology. But 2,500 years ago, when the Buddha was born in the year 563 BC, they didn't have that technology. So she ends up dying 7 days later. And because death of the woman was not uncommon during those time frames, they actually had protocols in place to take care of those kinds of things. That if you died as a woman and your child lived after birth, then your siblings would adopt your children as their own. So Siddhartha Gautama's mother had an older sister who adopted Siddhartha Gautama as her own child. And essentially his aunt became his stepmother. Now, in the original teachings, it shares a story of what happened during the birth of Siddhartha Gautama. And I don't know that it's true, but I don't know that it's untrue either. I'll share it with you, what you'll see. But then I actually don't think that it's actually true because it describes a pretty significant miracle that occurred. And oftentimes throughout history, people will embellish the story of someone who's really great and wonderful like the Buddha, but we don't need to embellish the story of a Buddha because he's already done something really wonderful. But this is what it says in his original teachings in the Pali Canon, the people who documented it. And now we're looking at this 2,500 years later. What it says is that at the time of his birth, that he immediately walked 7 steps, lotus flowers were blossoming under his feet, and he spoke and he said, "This will be my last birth." If this was true, the next part of the story wouldn't actually be needed. So that's why I don't think this part of the story is true. And I think people probably embellished his story as time went on to try to make him look even better than he already was. But again, with a Buddha, we don't need to do that because a Buddha has already done amazing things in the world. We don't need to embellish their story. But this is what you'll see that it says. But if this part of the story was true, we wouldn't need the next part because the next part is that his father, being the king, he summons advisors to come help him to understand what his child is going to become. This was a common practice that you would have like fortune tellers to come and let you know what your child was going to become. So he summons 108 advisors to come and help him understand what his child was going to become. Well, if your child is walking as soon as they come out of the womb and lotus flowers are blossoming under their feet and they're talking, you don't really need people to tell you what this child's going to become. It's pretty miraculous of what's going to happen here. Right? But this is nonetheless what is described in the original text. So these 108 advisors come to help his father to understand what he's going to become. And 107 of those advisors tell the king that your son's going to be a great monarch. He's going to rule over your territory. He's going to expand your kingdom far and wide. And he's going to be this great, powerful leader. And then, of course, the father, that's my boy. Yeah, all right, let's go. Come on, expand my territory. Let's do it. Right? But then there's this one advisor who comes in and says, "Sir, I'm so sorry. I overheard those other advisors and they're 100% correct. Your son is going to be a great leader, but not in the way that you think. He's not going to be a monarch. He's not going to be a ruler. He's not going to expand your territory. He's actually going to be a spiritual leader." And his father didn't like that. And he decided he was going to sequester his son in the palace and keep him in the palace his entire life because he wasn't interested in him getting involved in worldly affairs. He felt like if he went outside and he saw what was going on in the kingdom, that maybe he would be interested in being a spiritual leader. But if he could keep him inside the palace and kind of woo him into the ways of being a monarch and get him attached to that lifestyle, that he would never be interested in being a spiritual leader. So he kind of lavished him with wonderful gifts and fabrics and food and entertainment and beautiful women bathing him and taking care of him and all these different things. Anything you can imagine that a rich father could do for their child, he did that. Wonderful fabrics for his clothing and all these other kinds of things. And at the age of 29, Siddhartha Gautama had lived this life in the palace and he was about to become the king because during this lifetime, you would become the king when your father turned or when you turned the age of 30. When you turned the age of 30, your father would retire and now they would be there alongside of you to help you become a better and better king. So Siddhartha Gautama at the age of 29, he knew he was about to become a king, and he had never been outside the palace. And he was like, how can I rule over these people if I've never even been outside the palace? How could I ever make any decisions as a king to know how to help these people if I just stayed in the palace? So without his father knowing and against his wishes, he went outside the palace, and he took with him his royal attendant, kind of like his chief of staff. And when he went outside the palace, he had what was called the four observations. These four observations are that he saw an aging person, a sickly person, a dead corpse, and he saw a roaming ascetic, someone who's given up worldly possessions in order to understand life. So when he sees the aging, old, decrepit person, he has to ask the royal attendant, like, what's going on over there? Because he sees this disgruntledness and this frustration. And he's like, oh, that person's gotten old. They're having health issues. They're not able to acquire the food and clothing and the things that they need to sustain their life. And they're kind of like having these difficulties. And this was like really, mind blowing for Siddhartha Gautama, because he lived this life of luxury where everything and anything that he had available to him was there and available for him, where he saw this person struggling and he had never seen that before. Then he saw this sickly person who was ill. And the same thing is that there was this disgruntledness and this agitation and frustration around this person. He has to ask his royal attendant, like, what's going on over there? And he's like, the same thing. Like, this person is sick. They can't get the basic necessities that they need to sustain life. And this is, again, mind blowing to him because he had never seen this before. Then he saw a dead corpse, and the family was grieving around the corpse. And once again, he had to ask what was going on over there. And he's like, they lost their family member and they're not going to be able to sustain their life because this person was like one of the people who was helping to provide resources for the family. And again, really didn't understand this because he'd never seen this kind of thing before. Then he ultimately had the fourth observation, which is he saw like a roaming ascetic. We would probably call this person a monk or an ordained practitioner, where they've given up worldly life, entered into this life of homelessness, and now they're trying to understand the mind and the world around them in order to be able to get to enlightenment. Not everybody needs to do that in order to get to enlightenment, but there were many people who were doing that at the time in order to be able to find their way to enlightenment. And the Siddhartha Gautama had to ask his royal attendant, what's going on over there? What's that guy doing? And they're like, oh, this guy, he's trying to figure out all this other stuff, this aging, sickness, and death. He's trying to figure out all that stuff and why that stuff is occurring so that he can help people. And Siddhartha Gautama decides that's what he would like to do. He would like to figure out all this sickness, aging, and death and how to help people, because he felt like he couldn't rule over this kingdom because there was full of misery and despair. He wasn't interested in ruling over misery and despair. So at this time, he has a wife and he has a young infant child. And he makes his way back to the royal palace, and it's nighttime and they're sleeping. And he didn't understand the human mind as much as he did by the time he got to enlightenment, but he understood it enough that he felt like if he woke them up and said goodbye to them, that he wouldn't be able to leave. And he knew that he needed to leave in order to help these people, in order to help them out of this misery and despair. So he kind of looks in on them and just kind of leaves out of the royal palace. And he takes with him his horse and his royal attendant. This is his favorite horse and the royal attendant he takes with him out of the palace. And as he journeys out of the palace, he ultimately gets to a point where he cuts off his hair. At this time, if you were a member of the royal family, you would grow this long, beautiful, flowing hair. And this is how people knew you were a member of the royal family, is that if you went outside in the kingdom and you had this long, beautiful, flowing hair, they knew you were a member of the royal family, because it was only the royalty that would be able to grow their hair that way. Those of us that were working in the fields and doing labor jobs, we couldn't grow long, beautiful, flowing hair because it would get knotted and tangled up, and we wouldn't have the ability to take care of it. It was only the royal family that could sit around with servants, combing their hair, brushing their hair, shampooing their hair, detangling their hair. So if you had this long, beautiful, flowing hair, they knew you were a member of the royal family. Where today, what we do in a place like Thailand, who has a royal family, we just take pictures, and we put pictures all over the kingdom, and everybody knows who the royal family is. But back then, you didn't have that ability. So that's why they had this long, beautiful, flowing hair. So him cutting off his hair is like, I'm never going back, because 29 years growing this hair, if he tried to assume the throne and be the king again, like nobody would ever think that he was actually the king because he didn't have this long, beautiful, flowing hair. There's other things that cutting off your hair does. Not everybody has to cut off their hair in order to get to enlightenment, but it is one aspect of the path that is possible There's other things that it accomplishes for you, which we'll talk about tomorrow when we get to that point. But nonetheless, the Buddha, not yet a Buddha, cut off his hair at that particular time. He turns his horse, lets it go. He tells his royal attendant, like, you've been a great royal attendant, thank you. And he kind of lets this go. Now he enters into this life of trying to figure out how to get to enlightenment. And he initially takes up training with two individual teachers. The first teacher he trains with, and then the second teacher he trains with each teacher for 1 year. So he trains with the first teacher for a year. And this teacher teaches him to hang himself upside down from trees, to lay on beds of nails, to starve himself, to pierce his body with metal implements. Don't worry, we're not going to be doing any of that stuff, right? And what Siddhartha Gautama realized that by the end of this, that his mind wasn't any more peaceful than it was when he was in the royal palace. But this teacher had come to him and said, hey, you've mastered my teachings. You can now share my teachings. And frustrated with that, because he had spent this entire year and his mind hadn't improved, he left from that teacher and he went to a second teacher. And the second teacher started teaching him other things, but essentially the same things: starving himself, hanging himself upside down from trees, piercing his body with metal implements, laying on beds of nails, all that kind of stuff. And he got to the end of that year, and the teacher said, hey, you've mastered my teachings. You can now share my teachings. And he was frustrated with the whole thing because his mind hadn't gotten any better. So he goes off on his own. He goes off into the forest. But the only thing that he knows how to do are those same things that the teachers were teaching him. So he continues to do these types of practices all the way to the point where he was eating 1 grain of rice per day. He took it all the way to the extreme. He was interested to test it and see if it was actually working. So as he was in the forest, just eating 1 grain of rice per day, he gets to the point where he's basically on death's doorstep. His bones are protruding. He basically skin and bones. He's sitting on the edge of the forest. You might have actually seen artwork where they depict this, where his cheekbones are protruding, his other bones are protruding. But he's sitting on the edge of the forest. He's meditating, and he's basically about to die, right? And there's this mother and this young daughter who come by, and they see the condition that he's in, and they beg and they plead with him to eat some rice. And they offer him this big plate of rice. And he has this realization in this moment that what he had been doing when he was in the royal palace was living this life of sensual pleasures, where he had everything and anything you could imagine. But then when he left the royal palace, he swung all the way to the other side, where now he's eating 1 grain of rice per day. And neither of those two extremes led to enlightenment. So he needed to figure out this middle way. This is where he comes up with this teaching of the middle way. He has this realization that he needs to start doing things in moderation and kind of gradually working towards this. So he reluctantly accepts this rice, starts to eat it, has this realization that he needs to be practicing this middle way. And over the next 4 years, he figures out how to get to enlightenment, how to train his mind. And he knows that he's gotten to enlightenment because his mind's peaceful. It's calm, it's serene, it's content with joy. He knows what anger experience is like. He knows what experiencing sadness and frustration is like. He understands all of that. And now he can see his mind's no longer experiencing that. So he knows he's gotten to enlightenment. But he knew his teachings were radically different than what anyone else was teaching during the time, because they were hanging themselves upside down from trees and laying on beds of nails, where he didn't have any of that in his teachings. And he knew that what he had to share with people was so different that he wasn't sure if the world was ready for what he had to share. So he goes to this tree and he spends time at this tree for 7 weeks. This is in Northeast India. And we're actually taking a trip this year to visit all the sites of the Buddha. We're going to be going to his birthplace and all these other places that he actually lived during his lifetime and touring around. You guys are welcome to go if you like. You'll find it on our website. But nonetheless, he spent time at this tree for 7 weeks, contemplating whether or not he should share his teachings. And we know the end of the story is that after the 7 weeks, he decided to share his teachings, because he could have went back to the royal palace and lived this life of luxury and just been in the peace and joy. But he decided that he was going to share what he had to offer to the public. So he starts making his way back to where those original two teachers were. And as he's making his way back to that area, he encounters 4 of his previous classmates and 1 of his previous teachers. And when they see him coming, they start laughing at him and joking him and mocking him, right? Because to them, in order to get to enlightenment, you needed to be starving yourself. You needed to be disparaging the human body. And here they see this healthy, bright, vibrant, radiant individual walking towards them with meat on his bones and looking cheerful and glad, where they were like disgruntled and agitated because they were doing all these disparaging things to their body. So when they saw him coming, they started laughing at him and joking him and mocking him. But by the time you get to that point in your journey, when you're actually enlightened, none of that stuff's going to affect you. That he wasn't upset, he wasn't frustrated, he wasn't angry or any of those other things. So he just comes over to where they're at. He sits down on the ground and he takes his hand and he touches the earth. And this is the one and only miracle that he performed during his lifetime, where when he touches the earth, these animals come to where he's at. So there's like birds and butterflies and squirrels and rabbits and lizards and snakes. They all come to where he's at. And these five people are like, okay, you've got my attention. What do you have to say? And they sit down, and then he delivers his first discourse, which is the Four Noble Truths. This is what I'm going to teach you tomorrow, where in four simple statements, he explains the problem in your mind, the cause of that problem, the elimination of it, and the path forward. And the way that the teachings of the Buddha are is that they're independently verifiable. So when he explained these four statements, these individuals were able to independently verify it on the spot that he had figured out indeed what the problem is in the mind, the cause of it, the elimination of it, and the path forward. So now they understood that, yes, he had gotten to enlightenment because they could independently verify what he had to say. And then from that point forward, he just continues to teach. He gets to enlightenment at the age of 35, and he teaches in Northeast India, essentially. He was born in Nepal, but then he was teaching in Northeast India. And from the age of 35 to the age of 80, he ends up teaching countless people for 45 years. And countless people get to enlightenment during his lifetime. And then after his death, the teachings were preserved in such a way that countless more people got to enlightenment after his death. And these are the three main criteria of what make a Buddha, is they get to enlightenment by themselves without the help of any teachers or any guides. They then dedicate the rest of their life to sharing their independently discovered teachings with countless people. And then they preserve their teachings in such a way that countless more people will get to enlightenment after their death. So his community of practitioners just grew and grew and grew and grew. There were times where teachers of other schools would come and talk to him. They would bring with them their students, and they would try to talk to the Buddha and try to understand his teachings. And sometimes the teacher would get so angry and frustrated they would like get up and storm out. And then the students that were there, they're like, oh my goodness, our teacher isn't enlightened. And those students would actually become students of the Buddha. Or sometimes that teacher would be talking with the Buddha in such detail and understand his teachings that they would then become a student of the Buddha, and they would bring with them their students. So his community just grew and grew and grew and grew until he ultimately died at the age of 80. And now we have his teachings. They've been preserved, and they're accessible to you to be able to experience the same mental state. You won't see anywhere where the Buddha's pushing you or trying to convince you or guilting or shaming or fearing you into anything. It's up to you to decide if you would like to experience that same mental state that he experienced. So his teachings are now available in what we refer to as the Pali Canon. So this sickness, aging, and death are the three things that really motivated him. There's those four observations: sickness, aging, death, and then the roaming aesthetic. And what he discovered through his journey to enlightenment is that the reason why people are so disgruntled and frustrated when they're sick is that their mind is craving permanent health. That because their mind is craving to be permanently healthy, when you're sick, you'll be angry or frustrated or disgruntled during that period of time. And the mind just doesn't understand that this body is impermanent. It cannot be permanently healthy. It's just not possible. But the mind's lack of wisdom will crave this permanent health. And as long as you're craving permanent health, then when you experience sickness, your mind doesn't like that change. It doesn't like when things are changing. Or people might crave permanent youthfulness. So now when you're aging, you see wrinkles, you see gray hair, you start losing your hair, the mind can't move, or the body can't move around as easily. The mind can experience frustration and agitation when it's experiencing this because it's craving permanent youthfulness, not understanding that this body is impermanent. And then with death, the reason why the mind grieves and has sorrow at the time of death is that it's craving permanent life, right? So if you crave to exist in this world permanently, as you get closer and closer to death, your mind's holding on to this existence, wanting it to be permanent. Your mind is experiencing this impermanence and it doesn't like that. Or say people around you are dying, like your family members, your mother, your father, your brother, your sisters, people like this. Well, it's not the love that's causing your grief and sorrow and sadness. It's the mind craving this person to be permanent, when in reality, they are impermanent. They're going to arise, they're going to change, and they're going to fade away. Because there's birth, there's going to be sickness, aging, and death. There's going to be grief, sorrow, pain, and displeasure. As long as there's birth, it's going to be experienced. There's no way around it. The only thing you can do is escape it through training your mind. And by training your mind, you can get to the point where you're not upset or frustrated or irritated when you're sick or when you're aging or as you're getting close to death or the people around you are dying. You can maintain your peacefulness and your joy. So it's not that you're happy or joyful because mom died. That's not it. It's because mom died, despite the fact that that has occurred, you can maintain your peacefulness and your joy because you're not holding on and wanting mom or dad to be permanent. So the Buddha figures this out, and you'll understand it more when I walk you guys through the Four Noble Truths tomorrow. But he ultimately figures out what is causing the disgruntledness during sickness, aging, and death. And he comes back to the area where he was originally at, and he teaches his son, his wife, his stepmother, who is his aunt, all these people and others were getting to enlightenment. So his ability to leave for 6 years allowed him to discover the teachings that he needed in order to be able to help people. Whereas if he stayed in the palace, he would have never been able to figure that out. So while he did leave for 6 years, it was the best decision he ever made because then he figured it out and he could come back and help his family. And that's what he ultimately did. Do you guys have questions on the life story of the Buddha? Yeah, we have microphones. For those of you guys online, if you have questions, you can put that into Facebook, YouTube, or Zoom, or raise your hand in Zoom, and I'll be able to see that.
Thank you, David. My question was around the miracle that Buddha performed, um, and the reasoning why he chose to perform only a single miracle. Um, so, if you've been talking multiple times, we taught, and Buddha says that too, that the teachings are hard to understand, hard to uh, and how to practice and how to get to, not very hard, but it's still you have to do a lot of work to get to enlightenment, and it's hard to understand the teachings. It's because they're very subtle. So I mean, one way to look at it, it would be that if you had maybe performed more miracles, then people have were some people who are like on the borderline of trying to do the learn the teachings would have been more affected by seeing that somebody has is able to, with his enlightened mind, able to perform miracles or perform more um, miracles, I guess, and would have been more attracted to the teachings and maybe put up perform more, and more people have sort of got into enlightenment that way. What would you say about that?
Yeah, so a Buddha's ability to teach isn't dependent on people knowing that he's an actual Buddha. It's actually better if people don't know that he's an actual Buddha. Whereas if he performed regular miracles, then people would just be believing of what's going on and who he is. And a Buddha doesn't work through belief, they work through helping their students to cultivate wisdom to understand the truth. And because his teachings are independently verifiable, he didn't need people to know that he was a Buddha. He could teach them, and then they could independently verify his teachings. And one of the powers that a Buddha has is being able to observe the quality of their students' mind and then offer them teachings to be able to then help them. Whereas if everybody knew that he was a Buddha, then he wouldn't be able to see the natural quality of their mind, because typically what's going to happen in those situations is people are going to be on their best behavior when they're around an actual Buddha if they knew that this person was a Buddha. And now they're hindered from being able to use that ability to be able to observe the quality of their student's mind. So the ultimate goal of a Buddha is to be able to help countless people to get to enlightenment, because that's how the teachings actually get preserved. Nowadays, we have books and videos and podcasts and audiobooks and things like that, but that alone isn't going to lead someone to enlightenment. There needs to be individuals, people who have the wisdom of enlightenment within their own mind and actually be enlightened, because there needs to be guidance along the path. So the best thing a Buddha can do is help as many people get to enlightenment as possible. And he would be more successful in that if people don't know that he's an actual Buddha. And now he can observe the natural state of their mind, help them with teachings that will eradicate the pollutions of the mind. And then more and more people could actually get to enlightenment that way. But a Buddha does perform one initial miracle in order to kind of help an instrumental group of people to understand that they are a Buddha. But then from that point forward, they don't perform any more miracles because their teachings are independently verifiable, and they would like to preserve the ability for people to, or for him to be able to observe the quality of their student's mind. During the lifetime of the Buddha, he did mention to certain people that he was a Buddha. He didn't perform any more miracles, but he did let people know like he is a fully perfectly enlightened Buddha. Where today, if a Buddha went around talking like that, we would discount that and think that they were having ego and they're not even enlightened. But during his lifetime, he explained to people that some people, not everyone, but some people, he explained that he was a Buddha. And he needed to do that because people didn't understand what a Buddha was. But now that we know what a Buddha is, if somebody went around and saying that they were a Buddha, we would consider that to be ego. But the ability for him to teach is actually and help people is enhanced by people not knowing that he's an actual Buddha.
One more question, different question. You just mentioned Buddha being a perfectly enlightened one, fully perfectly enlightened one.
Mhm.
So is a Buddha always a fully perfectly enlightened one, or there can be Buddhas who are, I guess what if they're not fully perfectly enlightened? Or that's just like the way you talk about a Buddha.
Yeah, every Buddha is going to be considered to be fully, perfectly enlightened. Because if you learn from a teacher who's not a Buddha, for example, and you get to enlightenment, you might be enlightened, but maybe 70, 80, 90% of what you know actually led to your enlightenment. There might be some like extra baggage that you're holding on to, like 5%, 10%, 20% of things that you're doing that didn't lead to your enlightenment, but you're still doing those things, right? But you're enlightened, but you're not fully perfectly enlightened. By the time an individual gets to enlightenment by themselves without the help of any teachers or any guides, what they know in terms of the wisdom of the path is exactly what it takes to get to enlightenment. So a Buddha, if they are meditating and they're trying a certain meditation, they can see that that meditation is actually helping their mind or not helping their mind, and they will discard the thing that isn't helping them, and they will retain the thing that's actually helping them. Where the average student, they don't have the ability to see that level of clarity, so they might actually be doing some things that didn't lead to their enlightenment, but then they're doing enough of all the other things that did lead to enlightenment that they actually got to enlightenment, but they still have a little bit of extra baggage around. But by the time someone like Siddhartha Gautama doing this by himself gets to enlightenment, he's going to discard anything that doesn't work, and he's going to only retain the things that actually work. So now we refer to that person as fully perfectly enlightened because what they know is exactly the path to enlightenment. And now they spend the rest of their life illuminating that path, kind of putting down candles or lights along the path so that more and more people can see what that path is. You're welcome.
Do you think the Buddha would have attained enlightenment if it wasn't for that mother and daughter pleading that he ate something? Seems like it.
Yeah, an individual who's going to be a Buddha, they're going to get to a Buddha. They're going to get to enlightenment at at some point in one way or another. They're going to have different events along their journey that are going to uh, be events that allow them to figure something out. So this was a particular event that allowed him to figure out this middle way. But if it wasn't that event, it would have been another event. He would have figured it out at some point because a individual who's going to become a Buddha, they have certain qualities and certain experiences all through their life that are going to lead them to this enlightened mental state based on their own wisdom, but they're going to have different experiences along the way that allows them to cultivate the wisdom that they need. So it wasn't like a mother and daughter taught them anything. They were just offering him rice. And in the moment, he could have rejected the rice and he would have died probably, right? But he, with his own wisdom, looked at the rice, realizing the condition that he was in, realizing what he needed to do, and he made the choice of going towards moderation rather than continuing what he was doing. Where somebody else, I'm sure during his lifetime, there were probably other people who didn't do that, and they actually probably died as a result of those aesthetic practices. I can only imagine there was people that experienced that. So he would have had multiple experiences during his life that helped him to cultivate the ultimate wisdom that it took. But if it wasn't that situation, it would have been another one.
What did the Buddha do in his past life to lead to that enlightenment in that life?
Sure, he talks about multiple, countless past lives in the past. He talks about many different animals and different human beings and different things like this. He was asked, what is it that allowed him in his previous lives that led to enlightenment? One of the main things that he talks about is he talks about practicing generosity and that he was very generous in the past, and he gives very specific examples of that. Because when you're practicing generosity, where you're giving and sharing with others without any expectation of anything in return, that's helping to train your mind to let go. So he talked about okay, maybe you can work on these, Vipaf. We have a corded mic on the way that's going to take away this battery. So I think it's going to be here this morning. So so in his teachings, he talks about what led to his ability to be able to get to this enlightened mental state in his last life as a Buddha. And he talks about generosity, because that's training your mind to let go, because what the mind's doing is it's holding on and craving. So generosity is one thing. He talks about mastery of his mind, and he talks about discipline and these kinds of things. But there's multiple past lives that he had. But he talks about the qualities that he was practicing during those lives that led to his ability to get to enlightenment on his own. But there's one aspect of a Buddha's mind, or the person who's going to become a Buddha, that is unique from other people that allow them to do this. That in your mind, you have a limited capacity that you can only remember, kind of like the past 5 or 10 years of what was going on in your life. Whereas if you think back to your childhood, you don't have like deep recall of exactly what you were doing in any given moment, because your mind has a limited capacity. It's like a hard drive, like maybe 500 gigabytes or 1 terabyte. And you had to delete those old files in order to store these new files of the last 5 or 10 years. So your mind is going to delete these old files and now store these new files. And that's why you have spotty memories when you think about your childhood. But an individual who's going to become a Buddha, they have direct recall, and they can remember countless details about their current life and their previous life too. So they accumulate all this wisdom to get to the point where they can apply it and actually move their mind to enlightenment. But in terms of the qualities that he was practicing, it was generosity. He talks about mastery of the mind, and I think it was self-discipline or something like this. There was 3 things. But if you're interested in those 3, I can look it up for you and let you know. Yes, sir.
Hi, David.
Mhm.
Does this work?
Sure is.
I'm curious how Buddha's experience from childhood differed spiritually from his experience after enlightenment. It sounds like in his first 29 years of life, he had everything he wanted. So, did he have the emotions of anger and the things that he was able to get rid of in enlightenment?
Yes, he would have had anger and sadness and frustration, all those feelings, because every being who's born is unenlightened. That's the whole reason why we're being born, is that we haven't gotten to enlightenment in our previous life. So now we're being born into this life. And as long as there's birth, there's going to be sickness, aging, death, sorrow, grief, pain, and displeasure. You can ultimately transcend that through training of your mind. But if there's birth, there's going to be these things that are occurring. So he experienced those feelings during his life for those first 29 years and even the first 35, because it's not until you actually get to enlightenment that your mind is completely peaceful and joyful. You'll know that for 1 year, 2 years, 3 years that your mind is experiencing this. But the way that it works is the the discontent feelings gradually diminish over time, where you're experiencing less and less of those, and there's longer and longer gaps between them. And then ultimately you get to a point where it's 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, where you're not experiencing those anymore. And the wholesome qualities gradually increase as you're making your way to enlightenment. So you could actually study these teachings, start practicing them. I've had some students in as short as 2 days, like this particular course right here. I've had students come in on like the third day, and they're like, David, I got an email this morning that normally would have shaken up my mind and I would have been so upset, but I understood. I understood what this was, and I didn't get upset. I didn't get frustrated, and I saw benefit just in 2 days. So sometimes people can have those experiences where it's not like you work for 10 years and being disgruntled and agitated, and then boom, you're enlightened. That's not the way it works. It's this gradual progression. So your discontent feelings are gradually diminishing, and the wholesome qualities are gradually increasing. So during his life, those first 35 years, he would have experienced some degree of painful feelings and frustration, agitation, annoyance, shyness, embarrassment, disappointment, all these stress and anxiety. But then ultimately he figured out what was causing it within his own mind. And then he used tools and techniques to uproot that. And that's what allowed him to experience enlightenment. And that's what he taught for those 45 years.
So in Buddha's path, you see him talking about his past lives and the things in his past lives that led to eventually becoming the Buddha. And I was just wondering if there's potentially an opposite end of the spectrum where in your past lives you walk a path that accumulates in your discontent, and there becomes eventually an individual that is increasingly more and more discontent as time goes on.
Yeah, when we're born into this life, we're born based on certain causes and conditions from our previous life. Just to get into this human realm, we all produced a certain amount of wholesome gamma or wholesome decisions just to be able to get here, because this is like the ideal existence, to be able to be in the human realm. Where in the lower realms, you can't actually get to enlightenment. You need to get to a human or heavenly birth. And now, once you're in the human realm, for example, each of us are going to have different levels of pollution in our mind when we come to this path. And then as we progress in life, our pollutions are either increasing or they're decreasing, depending on our environment and what we choose to do, how we choose to train our minds. So like if I grew up like I did in a very hostile and bitter and harsh environment, my mind was taking on certain conditioning where I was conditioned to think how to function. So like I remember being at McDonald's where my mom had ordered food, and we didn't get our French fries, for example, and she would yell and holler and scream at the cashier. And I learned this growing up as a child. You're looking at your adults around you, and that's how you learn how to be a human being, is by the people around you. So if you grow up in that hostile and bitter and harsh environment, one of the things that I learned growing up, which I no longer do, of course, which was if somebody doesn't do something the way you want, you yell and holler and scream at them until you get what you want. But that's the whole problem, and your mind gets conditioned that way. And now for a certain period of my life, that's the way I functioned for a period of time. But then you start realizing like this doesn't work. This isn't leading to peacefulness. This isn't leading to harmonious relationships. This isn't leading to a better way of life. And then that's where the Buddhist teachings help you to be able to see how to do that. So we will all have different levels of pollution. The way that I describe it in the book is I say you're either walking towards the darkness or towards the light. Which direction you walk is completely up to you. It's your choices of which direction you walk. And if you're walking towards the teachings of the Buddha and training your mind, you're walking towards the light, where the mind can be peaceful and joyful. Whereas if we go in the other direction, maybe we're stealing, maybe we're having sexual misconduct, maybe we're lying, maybe we're taking substances that cause heedlessness, we're walking towards the dark, being disgruntled and bitter and harsh to the people around us. So yeah, there's certain causes and conditions that lead to these things, but you can overcome everything. So no matter what you did in your past lives, no matter what you're experiencing from those past lives or this life, you can overcome those things. So during the lifetime of the Buddha, there was an individual who had killed 999 people. They were a murderer. They killed 999 people. And they actually cut off people's fingers, and they wore this necklace of fingers. And this individual encountered the Buddha at one point and ended up becoming a student of the Buddha. And this individual actually got to enlightenment during that lifetime. So the reason why I mentioned the story is that sometimes people are wondering, like, can I get to enlightenment? Can I get to enlightenment? I've done all these bad things in my past, all these unwise things. Can I really get to enlightenment in this life? Well, I'm sure none of you have killed 999 people. I'm sure of that. That's one thing without even talking to you individually. I'm sure none of you have done that, right? So if this individual can get to enlightenment, there's no reason why each one of you guys couldn't.
A question on that specific individual.
Mm-hmm.
Before that person reached enlightenment, did that person have to first address the atrocities that they had committed and correct that, or in some way atone for the things that they had done?
Yeah, you're going to experience the results of your unwholesome karma. You can't run and hide and escape from it. So he had to experience the results of that in order to be able to extinguish his unwholesome karma. So each one of us have to do that. And I'm going to be teaching you that when we get to talking about the natural law of karma and how does it affect you. I'm going to explain to you how this occurs, and I'm going to even use examples from my life to help you be able to see how I had to do this in order to be where I am today.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. You're welcome. What's that? Oh, the left. Oh, we lost something. There we go. Okay. Any more questions? Oh, yes.
Wondering, were there other Buddha?
This is the one conflict that I've seen in the Pali Canon, because throughout the entire Pali Canon, I've read a good deal of it. I haven't seen any conflicts. This is the only one where there's some places where it's quoting the Buddha as having talked about previous Buddhas, but then there's a place where it says that he said that I am the discoverer, the declarer, the originator of the path to enlightenment, undeclared before me. And this is a conflict, right? Because that statement is like, hey, I'm the only Buddha, right? And all the other ones are saying that there were Buddhas before him. In my opinion, I don't think there were any Buddhas before him, because once you understand the path to enlightenment and you understand the intellectual understanding that needs to happen in order to get to enlightenment, prior to the Buddha, we didn't have enough intelligent conversation to be able to get to that level of understanding. Because, when we first started out as human beings, we were kind of moaning and groaning and grunting to each other. We couldn't even have intelligent conversation, and conversation grew over time in our ability to communicate. So 2,500 years ago, and shortly before that, is where conversation had evolved enough to the point where we could conversate with each other. So I don't think that there was the ability for humans to understand what we understand today in terms of conversation to have a Buddha in the past to be able to get to that. And we know that human existence has been around. I think different people date at different times, but I think about 200,000 years is what they think human beings have existed on the planet. Now, if there were some civilizations that were long in the past that are like lost information, we don't have that, because the Earth is reported to have been here for about 4.5 billion years. So the last 2,500 years, like that's like a blink of an eye compared to that. So, and even the 200,000 years of our human history, that's like a blink of an eye compared to that length of time. So if there were civilizations before that the Buddha was aware of, I don't have any insight into that. But why this is a very interesting question, and people oftentimes ask it, at this point, it doesn't actually matter, because at the end of the day, if your mind is discontent and you need the teachings to be able to figure out how to get to the peace and joy, we have the teachings of this Buddha to be able to help us to be able to do that. But it's always an interesting question to ponder and think about. But I don't think we're ever going to really know the answer, because we don't have any tangible proof that these people existed prior to the Buddha, other than the Pali Canon mentions this in several places. But then it also has this other teaching where the Buddha says he's the discoverer, the declarer, the originator of the path. So that's the one conflict that I've seen.
Related to that is I've seen a lot of these Buddhism and practices originate from Asia, from India, from like the Asian region in general. Can people get to enlightenment without this particular practice? So, for example, in other religions?
Yeah, so in the teachings of the Buddha, he says that it's not possible to get to enlightenment without the Eightfold Path. That if a collection of teachings doesn't have the Eightfold Path, you can't get to enlightenment. And what I see with like Jesus Christ teachings and Prophet Muhammad teachings and some other things, I see some things that are similar to what you see in Buddhism. Like Hinduism has some similarities, but it's not the same thing. It's completely different. Christianity has some similarities, but it's ultimately completely different. Same thing with Muslim teachings. And the reason why is because the Buddha is teaching the natural laws, and there's been other people who have tapped into those natural laws and understood them to a certain level of degree that they're explaining them. So Jesus Christ explained things as well, like love thy neighbor, right? And what that is loving kindness and compassion for all beings. Jesus Christ taught you reap what you sow. That is the natural law of karma, of cause and effect. So he described it in his own way, but in my opinion, Jesus Christ wasn't fully awake, like a fully perfectly enlightened Buddha, and these others weren't as well. So while Jesus was talking about something like the Holy Spirit, and when I talk to people who understand the Holy Spirit, it sounds very similar to what we would talk about as enlightenment, but I don't know that those things lead to the same mental state because I can't see in those teachings of how it would, but maybe there's somebody else that could. But for me, like I know that the teachings of the Buddha, for 100% certainty, they lead to enlightenment. But these other teachings, I can't see how they would lead to that same thing because typically they're based in belief. And with belief, you don't know what's true or false, and you can't actually cultivate the mind enough to be able to experience this enlightened mental state. And the Buddha himself talks about the Eightfold Path needing to be present in order for one to be able to get to enlightenment. I think they turn off when they're not being used.
I had a follow-up question that made me think of a good question. Did the Buddha believe in a God or a higher power?
The Buddha didn't believe in anything at all because by the time you get to enlightenment, you don't have any belief. You know the truth about what has occurred and what is occurring. You understand the natural laws. So you'll never see anywhere in the teachings of the Buddha where he talks about he believes in something. He does teach about God. He teaches about the supreme being, but he never talks about it in terms of belief. He talks about it as he knows, because as an individual who is a Buddha, he would have had certain experiences to be able to independently verify through his own direct experience of whether this being exists or doesn't exist. But his ultimate goal wasn't to convince people that God exists. Instead, he was helping people to understand who this being is and what this being does. But he doesn't make him a central figure in his teachings because it's not God who determines what you experience or whether or not you get to enlightenment. So he does teach about God, and we can understand that he knew that this being existed. Otherwise, he wouldn't have taught about this being, because by the time you get to enlightenment, you don't have any belief whatsoever. But you don't have to have an understanding of this being of God to get to enlightenment. You can have a relationship with this being or not and still get to enlightenment.
Is this being enlightened?
Yes.
And okay, and I guess kind of helping you on the path potentially. The being of God as referenced.
Yeah, it's just like a neighbor, right? Like you can choose to have a relationship with your neighbor or not. If you choose to have a relationship with your neighbor, it's wonderful, because from time to time, like maybe if you need something, you can go talk to them and say, hey, can I borrow some salt? Or, hey, I have some guests coming over. Do you have any cookies? I can't get to the store. I'll get some when I go over. Like if you have a relationship with them, they'd be more than willing to let you borrow that salt or those cookies. And that's not the reason why you have the relationship, because you want something from them. But it's just nicer to have a relationship with your neighbor. But you could also choose not to have a relationship with your neighbor, and you could run your life completely fine, no worries. So the same thing is true about this being of God, is that if someone is interested in a relationship with God, it will actually help you in your journey to enlightenment, and there's a way to understand that. But you need to be able to let go of some things that you've maybe been taught in the past, where if someone's been taught that God punishes you, or you need to fear God, or that you need to worship God, or any of these other things, if you've been taught those kinds of things, then you're going to be hindered because you're going to think that God's controlling what you experience, that God's punishing you or rewarding you. You're going to be afraid of God. If you were in a relationship where you were afraid of, like, say you were afraid of your life partner, you wouldn't be very comfortable in that relationship. So it's the same thing as people have been taught to fear God. Oftentimes, this is what people are taught. It's a very uncomfortable relationship to be in, to actually fear someone. So God's not interested in people fearing him. But if someone is interested in a relationship with this being can guide you and help you, but it's not going to be like on your beck and call. It's not like a little button that you press, or you can't send God an email and ask for his help. There's ways that he will guide you. But then also, if someone's not interested in a relationship, you can get to enlightenment that way too. So in that first book, chapter 18, I teach about how to get to enlightenment with a relationship with God or without one, because different people will make different choices, but there's certain things you need in either way. So for example, if someone hates God or has anger and hatred towards God, they're not going to be able to get to enlightenment that way, not because God is stopping them or blocking them, but just because your mind has anger and hatred. Even if you have anger and hatred for an ex-boyfriend or an ex-girlfriend, you're not going to be able to get to enlightenment that way either. You have to eradicate that hate in the mind. So if someone's not interested in a relationship with God, that's fine. They can still get to enlightenment, but they need to eradicate any hatred or ill will towards this being. But if someone is interested in having a relationship, there's certain things you need to learn there to have a healthy relationship. Because some people are taught to like pray to God, like God is like a genie in a bottle. And if I pray, God will give me whatever I want. And if someone comes from this perspective, they're not going to be able to get to enlightenment because it's not God that's going to do those things for you.
Is a period of discontentedness required for enlightenment? Like you had talked about your experience, and then like the journey of the Buddha, I feel like there's some similarities where something in the mind just feels like it's on fire or seeks a peace.
For a Buddha, they're going to experience that. For each individual human being, they're going to experience discontentedness, because if there's birth, there's going to be sickness, aging, death, sorrow, grief, pain, displeasure. But how much of that you experience is your choice, right? So like me growing up for 44 years, I was highly discontent at all different times during my life. And then at some point, I decided at the age of 44, okay, I'm going to now deeply study this. Even though I was dabbling with it before, Lisa knows that Lisa used to study Thai massage with me, and I used to dabble with Buddhism before. But it wasn't until 2018, when I was 44 years old, that I was like, all right, now I'm really going to get into this and really understand it. So I had to experience 44 years of grief, misery, and despair before I had enough. And I was like, all right, I'm now going to figure this out. Where my son, for example, he grew up very differently. I started teaching him formally when he was 6 years old, but we were actually doing things even before that with him to help him on this path. And now at the age of 12, he hardly ever gets discontent. He gets like a little annoyed, like maybe once or twice a year. But that's his choice, and that's his gamma, that he was born into a family where his mom and dad practiced the teachings very closely, and he was able to learn them. But none of us grew up that way. During the lifetime of the Buddha, people were getting to enlightenment as early as age 7. But it was their choice to be able to join the Buddha, learn his teachings, and then experience those results.
And then last one, can the Buddha, you talked about how the Buddha, wouldn't want to declare themselves because then they would understand the sort of the interactions with the students and how far they could get. Could the Buddha read minds? When you say enlightened, sometimes I think of somebody who knows everything, is all-knowing, like kind of like, in a sense, God.
Yeah, so an enlightened being and a Buddha is not all-knowing. A Buddha and an enlightened being, they do know the path to enlightenment inside and out, backwards and forwards. But for example, if you got to enlightenment, you wouldn't know how to fly an airplane unless you've done that, right? Unless you trained in that. But your mind would be capable of that if that's what you were interested, but you just haven't done that yet. So you're not going to be all-knowing. But an individual who's a Buddha, they can read people's minds, but it's not like they can sit here and be like, what is she thinking right now, right? The way that it works is that they're able to understand a person's mind through observation of that person's mind. There are special abilities that one can experience on their way to enlightenment. Like you can know certain aspects about the future, you can read people's minds, but it's not like a deliberate thing. It's like something that just kind of happens. So like I've been at the temple before and somebody would come and sit next to me that I'd never met before. And I would look at them and I say, what's happening with your mom and dad? And they're like, why do you ask? And I said, I think you're having some issues with your father, right? And they're like, oh yeah, my father died when I was 1 year old. And I started talking to them about their father and explaining things to them about their father that they didn't know beforehand. And some of the things that I was sharing, they did know, and they were confirming that I understood their father. And in this situation, this is like the father is there kind of guiding me in what I'm explaining to this person. But that's not a quality that you'd like to hold on to. And it's not a quality that you try to make money at or anything like that. But it is something that the mind can experience on your way to enlightenment, that you can experience some of these special abilities. But a Buddha and an enlightened being does have the ability to observe people's minds and sometimes even read their minds, but they only use it for helping that person. They're not going to show it off. They're not going to make money out of it and these kinds of things. All right. Let me see if we have questions on. Okay, I'm not seeing any questions online. So I'm just going to end this talk with just let's see. So this is kind of how I end this talk, is that no one ever said life would be easy, but it's also not supposed to be tough. Learning Gautama Buddha's teachings is not easy, but learning and practicing the teachings of the Buddha will ensure that life is not tough, right? We don't have to go through life with, misery and despair and grief and sorrow and all these kinds of things. We choose to do that because we lack wisdom in the unenlightened state, that there's even another option. We oftentimes think that in the human life that we're just kind of subjected to sadness and anger and frustration. We just think that's the way it is. And we oftentimes are blaming other people for what we're experiencing. But there is another way. There is a better way of life. And while it's not easy to be able to get to enlightenment, it's also not tough either. Ensuring to get to a point where your life isn't tough is to learn and grow and develop. And while the Buddha had to do that on his own, and it took him 6 years to do that, you don't have to do it alone. And you can't do it alone because you're not a Buddha. You don't have those same qualities of mind that a Buddha has, but you can actually make your way to this enlightened mental state. And that's up to you to decide that that's what you would like to do. So an individual who's a Buddha, an enlightened being, there's no part of this path that is to force or convince other people to do one thing or another. You are on your own independent journey to enlightenment. We're a teacher. We're kind of like a tour guide. We're kind of pointing out for you the things that you need to learn and grow and develop. We're providing you the resources nowadays, like books and audiobooks and videos and podcasts and personal guidance and things like that. But it's you. It's in the center of all of this. It's you that's deciding that you're done with the grief. You're done with the fear. You're done with the guilt and the shame. You're done with the arguments and the fighting and the broken relationships. And when you decide that you're done with all of that, that's where the teachings of the Buddha come in to be able to guide you. But it's you that's choosing to do the work, where a teacher is like a tour guide pointing these things out for you. There's never a time on the path where you would be interested to believe something. That's not what this path is about. You're an independent practitioner. You're not a follower. You're not a devotee. You're not any of those things. You're an independent practitioner looking to cultivate wisdom about this path. The same wisdom that the Buddha needed in order to get to enlightenment, it's the same wisdom that you need as well. So by learning and practicing his teachings, that's what's going to help you to cultivate that wisdom. But it's not based in belief. It's understanding the truth about these natural laws and how the world functions around you. And this is not easy because your mind is so used to doing things where there is anger, there is frustration, there is bitterness and harshness, and you might speak in ways that are unkind to some of the people around you. In transforming that, it's challenging. It's not easy, but it's not difficult either. So if you would like to continue to learn and grow and develop, that's what the Buddha is helping you to be able to understand. And after our break here, I'm going to teach you what is enlightenment. I'm going to go through and help you to understand what this mental state is, so you'll have more information about that. So it is, so I can help you. It's 11:15. So why don't we take like a good 20-minute break? That'll get us back at 11:35. So that'll be a good 20 minutes for you guys to break and have snacks and all that kind of stuff. And I think maybe Vibhav has something to say. So I'm just going to end this talk here and turn you guys over to Vibhav.